So, KrmaL's Contest 3. That happened, and I think it'd be cool to talk about. So, for those who aren't familiar, on May 3rd, KrmaL, or KrmaL, or KrmaL's uploaded a video announcing Contest 3, which is a creator contest with a simple premise: make a good level, but not too good. There's no exact way to interpret this premise for both figuring out a theme or any sort of limitation, at least one that isn't vague. So many of those who participated took this as an opportunity to make something unique or bold, crazy even, or took it as a perfect excuse to finally give level creating a shot, and both of those would be my reasons for making Blue. When I initially saw the contest announcement, I had just returned to Geometry Dash after about 2 years of not really being active with it, so I thought, no reason I shouldn't give it a shot. I've been wanting to make a level anyways. And little did I know of the series of events that would unfold for me from a decision I thought was pretty insignificant. My biggest motivation for participating was that maybe if I give it my full effort, it would be just good enough to stand out from the rest of the submissions. Much of my creating experience comes from making layouts, and rarely did I branch from that, but on the few occasions I did try decorating something, they weren't the greatest besides a few cool ones, but I never had the motivation or will to make a full level. Choosing the song wasn't too long of a deciding process for me. Since the theme of the contest was so vague, I decided to look at another source for what to shape my level around, and that would of course be the host of the contest, KrmaL. I could have used a song that KrmaL had already made a level to in Geometry Dash, but I knew it wouldn't have been very amusing or noticeable since many of the songs he's used have either been heard hundreds of times by now, or that they're so unique, and using said song couldn't really be torn from the identity of the original level. So I looked in another area consisting of many works by KrmaL, a neat little game called soundodger. For those who have checked out KrmaL's channel, you may have seen another fairly common game he uploads, which is soundodger. He's contributed many levels to its community, both user-made and even official, and one of his most iconic works in soundodger is Bloom, which is one of the harder levels made and beaten within the game. I highly encourage you to check it out, for the two reasons that it's a really cool level, and that it'll give a lot of context to many of my decisions behind Blue. So with this song chosen, I now had to establish some kind of vision and direction I wanted to take the level. My first immediate thought was minimalism, since that's a strong trait of both KrmaL's Bloom and soundodger Plus as a whole. This would set my foundation for how I thought of gameplay, which was to use as few obstacles to guide the player where I wanted them. Obviously this wasn't an exact solid limitation I set for myself, but it did decide how the gameplay was initially designed and later structured. The second goal I had in mind was to do things I've never really seen done in other levels before, which would end up being an incredibly fun direction to take, especially since I hadn't really made anything since the release of 2.2, so there were a lot of new things to explore. So with the contest introduced and the vision I had for Bloom established, it's time we get into the details of the level. But before I poke and prod at the level, I need to give an incredibly large amount of thanks to everyone who supported and guided me along the way through making the absolute behemoth that is this level. I've given these lovely folks a mention right below the level in the editor. Without their help, I'm not sure I could have made it as far as I did. And I need to give a special thanks to Temtic Park, who witnessed everything from the birth of the level to the final attempt of verification. He gave me ideas when I had none and kept me from going insane when I otherwise would have totally lost it. You and everyone else who pitched in with words of encouragement or more have my infinite gratitude, and there's just not enough thanks I can give that'll repay your efforts. But now, let's dive into the field of this flower. So to start with the beginning, I mentioned in the intro that one of my ideas for the level was to have as few objects as possible to get you where I want you to go, and this is kind of like what that looks like after being structured. It's not the most minimalist design thing, but I do think it does a good job of doing as few things as necessary. So with the swing copter, which is the starting game mode, I decided to go with that since it has a really floaty feel with less clicks compared to ship, because this is a maintained flight game mode, and I feel like that wouldn't have represented the whoosh sound of the song very nicely. Originally I didn't want the swing copter to be low gravity because I felt it would be really nice if you could take your knowledge of previous swing copter skills without affected gravity and apply it here, but it's kind of not really something possible, because if I take the gravity off, you'll see that the swing copter is mega aggressive in its flight, and that just would have been very off. Despite being the intro of the level, I didn't actually have like that much of a vision nor any sort of actual setup to make this establish the vibe of the level as a whole. I think in the end it does do a pretty good job, but a lot of like what is here we just kind of like placed there because I thought it'd be cool, and the part was very empty, so it needed some elements to fill the things up. The two ideas that I did have in mind whenever I initially made this part were kind of like that sweeping effect with the invert. I'm not quite sure exactly what the idea was behind it. I'm pretty sure it was just I saw the gradient trigger and was like, I want to use that somehow. And then as I looked through it, I saw the invert option and thought, oh, this could do a lot for this level. Because I think the contrast of like being both primarily white but also primarily black makes it feel diverse with its colors, which is definitely a really useful thing to do when you're working with a grayscale level. That makes me sound like a professional. This is like, I am no professional at this. And then for the last thing, for the beginning part, is this transition, which was I had got an idea from like the drop of sound in the song where it goes like, doo, and it kind of like leaves you wondering with a sense of curiosity. I feel like that's kind of like a common theme in this level, I think, is a sense of wonder. Maybe that's just me, because this level does feel very magical. I want it to be like you got sucked into like the center stream of abstractness or whatever. So the cursor disappears, not the cursor, oh my god, the player icon disappears, which puts a lot of emphasis on the upcoming obstacle, which is the portal, and also these ramps. So I feel like that's a very, like, we're moving on kind of transition. I really liked that. I was a huge fan whenever I thought of it, especially with the invisible cursor thing. Switching to the original copy here because I wanted to mention that this part was a great inspiration for how I would take the rest of the level in a direction for like how it was visually designed. Because there were a lot of like little elements here that I designed initially, because a lot of this was like the first day I made it. So I just kind of like placed stuff down. But whatever I placed down, I was a huge fan of, and it really stuck with me throughout the whole process of making the level. For the gameplay of the second part, I wanted to keep it really simple and kind of be like a hook for the level, because this is the first point in the song where it has both the whoosh noise and is also like kind of high energy. So I want it to be like a representation of everything that you should expect to see in a level. I did this by having both the repetitive gameplay, which kind of puts you in like a trance of sorts, hypnosis, that you're just like focusing, okay, do this, and then do this again, which I think is a pretty underrated thing to do in Geometry Dash, because it just like hits different. One of my favorite details in this part is the kind of like the spotlight fog and the breeze in and out throughout the part. Originally, I was just trying to mess with the lens circle to see what cool things I could maybe do with it, and I ended up kind of like making it so that it took up half of the screen with some specific settings. I was a huge fan because it like really added to like the blissful feeling of this initial part. Then for the ending transition of this part, it's nothing too crazy. I thought it was actually pretty clever for making use of like the swallowing lens circle that consumed you the whole time. So I thought, okay, well maybe just have it consume you actually for real, and then sort of like open up to a new world that you lock into. The gameplay for this ball part isn't anything too crazy. It was inspired by the ending of Sunset Sandstorm with this like weird, kind of like a ball cube maneuvering maze. Something that I really do want to mention is that this is my first time using the area scale trigger, so whenever I tried using it for the first time, I encountered the annoying bug where if you place a start position in the middle of a part with objects affected by the area scale trigger, it'll like scale to like size 1 quadrillion and it'll take up the whole screen. The first time this happened to me, I was extremely confused and upset because I was like, what do I do about this? Usually whenever a strange bug like this happens to a level of mine, it usually dies off because I can never bother how to fix it. Which actually almost killed the level this time too, but I was determined enough to figure out what was causing it, which I did eventually narrow down to being the area scale trigger. So the way I fixed that issue was by having them on touch trigger at the very beginning of the part, so that I can freely put a start position anywhere in this part without any issues. One of the many randomized bits in the level is what this message says. Originally I had it just as high because I thought it'd be like a cute little thing. And I believe it's something KrmaL does too, where he puts fun little text in his levels. But then I added a buy as a 50-50 chance. It's kind of like an in-level good luck or bad luck token. It doesn't really mean anything, but I thought it'd be a pretty fun like little detail to look forward to every run. I'm actually not too sure why I decided to go to duel for this. Probably because I thought it'd be like silly. Because in this part of the song, it kind of like almost enters a new segment. It's like a transition of sorts, and I felt a dual ball would really complement that. And then for this transition, I felt it'd be pretty, not smart or clever, but pretty fun to have it go to single by killing off your other buddy by falling into a pit of spikes. The reason why the level recommends you to play with grayscale icons is because of this with the icon, which I tried like turning off no effects for this portal, but as far as I'm aware, there's no actual way to prevent this from happening. There isn't a whole lot going on in this wave part. I just kind of came up with like one idea and then just ran with it for the whole section. So the idea here is kind of like the size and angle of the wave opposes the ramps that you have to squeeze through. Obviously this has been done in many levels, but I find it really satisfying, so I just decided, sure, let me do that. You can see here that like every other section it switches between normal, mini, and the orientation of the ramp, so it goes from like vertical to horizontal. This was a bit of a pain to make gameplay with because it was very limiting in what I could do. So stuff like this where the wave goes that is really simple. So is this. This whole part is pretty simple, but the whole idea is kind of like you're maneuvering through sections, which I feel is not done enough for the wave game mode, because it's kind of like if the wave was a chip where you just get to maneuver wherever you need to be, which I think is really fun. Then halfway through the part, I believe here, it starts going from where the mini wave lines up with the horizontal ramps and the normal wave lines up with the vertical ramps. This makes it hard to make the mini wave interesting, but it does make the normal wave, well, no, it didn't make it interesting because a lot of the movement is just gaps like this, but the way they're lined up is different. That was kind of fun messing around with, but it's not the most like innovative thing, but I guess in a way it's unique because the click pattern for this part is so strange and so weird that it ended up being one of the harder parts that I struggled with. So it actually went through a lot of nerves. This used to be a lot harder, at least for me, because I'm not that good with the wave. This part here, actually, there isn't too much to talk about here. The gameplay is fairly simple. I didn't try going for any crazy innovative ideas or anything. It seemed to like the almost percussion-ish beats. And I tried to go for an almost floaty feeling with the UFO, but it's not a strong or present trait or anything. This part actually took a lot longer than I would have wished it to, because I tried thinking for like a sort of design to maintain throughout the part, but there's nothing I could have thought of. There's some like work in progress ideas here, but I didn't like any of them. But I did eventually settle on the simple like 1.0 block kind of thing. One of the outstanding qualities in this part though is the effects with the parallax shader. I actually don't have a single clue how it works. Whenever I first made it, I was just like messing around with the shader trigger, which changes on what layer is affected, and after some like weird rotation dealing stuff, these two are disabled with touch trigger. It just ended up looking like this with a really neat outline. Then we get to this ball part, which is generally the exact same as the UFO, except it's slightly lower gravity. I tried messing around with pads this time instead of orbs, because there's actually a pink orb that follows you throughout the entire part. I tried making it so that all the pads were the blue gravity ones, but that wasn't something I came up with until later on. So you still have like the pink one here and the red one here, which I hope isn't too much of a confusing thing, but I would normally mention this transition, but there's not much to talk about it besides I thought it'd be cool, and I think that kind of goes for a lot of the things that I don't go over in this level, so do keep that in mind. This part definitely took me the longest amount of time to make, tied with the following part, which was due to the extremely limited gameplay designs that this part goes by. The structure of this part primarily relies on being in like an almost grid-like pattern. You can see here there's a half space, but that was just for like gameplay liberties. I tried not to do that, but it's done a lot of times throughout this part. For this beginning bit, all the spikes are facing upwards. I'm not sure why I did this. I thought it'd be cool, and it's not the most notable thing, but I guess it did help a lot with kind of innovating the gameplay here. Then we have these long periods of nothingness, which is to be in sync with the like drop off in the song where it's just one long note. So I want it to be almost like a rest of sorts. Then we can kind of see here, the problem is that I have to make use with using basic blocks as an obstacle. So there's a bit of finicky gameplay and having to like calculate where you need to click in order to land where you need to be. So that ends up repeating for a majority of the first part until you reach like the second bit. This adds the spider pad sync to the newly added like I want to say synth notes, and it also introduces what I kind of like to call the vines, because these blocks are not interactable but the spikes are, which might be a bit confusing, but I guess it's pretty easy to keep in mind once you get hit to it the first time. Then the periods of no clicks are now replaced with tunnels that you have to straight swing through. These gaps definitely vary a lot depending on whether or not there's a synth in the middle of the long nothingness note. And now the arrows on the main like pillars are now facing downwards. Originally I wanted to like have this trigger orb flick these down, but I decided against that idea. So then, you know, I continue the same design principle throughout the part. There are no interrupting notes here, so this is a bit of a tighter gap compared to the rest. Then we reach the new section, which introduces the breakable blocks and these trigger orbs that cause these to move up and fall back down, which is actually sort of foreshadowed by this spider orb, which is synced to the same exact noise that the following ones are. The sort of percussion noise. And then the final change is that now these arrows can point either direction, which isn't anything too crazy, but I thought it was a nice kind of like touch to make it feel like a culmination of everything before, which is actually the overall idea I tried going for here, and I think I did a pretty good job of that. I'm really proud of how it turned out. Designing this part took centuries though. I made like this bit in one session, then I went on like a couple days break, made this section, and it's just kind of repeated throughout. There were also struggles with making it play well because it was extremely limiting, because in this part, the clicks are also, most of the clicks are synced to the percussion noise, similar to the first ball. As for visuals, this is definitely one of the most impressive looking parts in a level. I'm not exactly too sure where to start because there's so many moving parts at once, so do forgive me if I bounce between a lot of elements at once. I do hope it will make sense in the end though. Firstly, we have these pillars here, which are a sort of mask that go over the blocks, but not the background. This was done by complete accident due to the layering, which I don't even know where to begin or talk about. The masking effect here was actually taken from Kid Smoke, because during the time of making this part, I was just going through some classic Geometry Dash levels, and once I went through Kid Smoke, the ending has a really clean masking effect that had me really curious. So I just kind of copy and pasted it here, and I don't know how, but I took a whole new spin on it, and I am a huge fan of that. You can also see here that the background gives a sort of texture to the blocks, which I have no clue how that's done, but it just is. And I think that kind of goes a lot for the visuals here. Overall, it's just a lot of separately made things that all came together to make something absolutely insane. And then for the sweeping pulses, there's an area tint trigger which affects both the masking effect and the blocks themselves. So it's kind of like they go from not being masked to being masked. There's a lot that goes into it, and I'm not exactly too sure how to explain it, but just know that it was just as unintentional as everything else was. Then we get to the duel, which took just as long as the part before, if not longer. This part was actually largely inspired by a comment that Temzik Park made. I didn't have anything here, and he had mentioned he thought the emptiness was intentional. So I decided to run away with that idea and sort of go for like an open field kind of vibe. But at the same time, the level needs to be balanced and I want this to be difficult, so it's kind of like being open but also difficult are really just juxtaposition ideas. I don't know if that's a real word, but they're opposites. So I decided to take this as an opportunity to turn it into a duel, which take up a lot of space, so it's much more easier to get away with being more open with the obstacles. Designing the gameplay took forever. There's not much to it besides I didn't want the swings to be symmetrical at all. In fact, very far from it. Almost like a dance of sorts, which I think is super fun, but obviously that does make the entire duel ungodly learning, which I am so sorry for anyone who does beat this level. There's not a lot to mention about the gameplay here, just know that the process was just a matter of clicking to the random notes and things in the songs, just like any element worked for me, and then just kind of figuring out how I could make or turn that into interesting duel gameplay. So it's just a lot of trial and error in what worked and what didn't. The visuals here aren't anything too much, it's just like two really simple background elements and then simple pulses which sync to various different things in the song. The first element is the field of spikes, which is sort of meant to complement that initial idea that it was open. So you know what else is open? A field outside, which is kind of a cool thing to take inspiration from. And then the same thing goes for this background, which is sort of meant to be like quote-unquote abstract mountains. That's how I kind of want to describe it, but that's not what it really is. Primarily, it was just an excuse to use an animated object within the level. And I think it does pretty good. It feels just nice to look at in the background. One of my favorite anti-cheese demotivator blocks in this level is for this part with the duel actually, where if you manage to make it so that the swing copters are like synced up together in gravity and basically act as one, it will end up triggering like a sort of alarm of sorts and end up activating secret pillars, which you can see here. And this basically just super buffs the part. This is also how I found out about the wonkiest hitboxes of all time. I heart you, Bob Top. Then we have one of my favorite whole segments in this level. This is supposed to be like an almost thematic break of sorts. Originally, I wanted this to be Cube, because if you haven't noticed, there isn't any Cube or robot in this level. That was once again, just one of the many decisions I thought would be cool, and I personally had a lot of fun with it. You may notice here that there's actually no borders here, and that's just because I kind of wanted to feel like ethereal in a way, because suddenly, just the close vertical gaps that you're so used to throughout the level are suddenly gone. They're technically still there, I just hide the ground, but that's kind of what the feeling I wanted to go for here. And it does feel like a nice, almost breath of fresh air right before like the final stretch, which is a super awesome feeling. This wave here is one of my favorite parts in terms of being structured, because you can notice here that every structure here is shaped like a flower. First you have the big ones that you just kind of like squeeze in and out of. Then you have the mini ones, these are supposed to look like petals, I hope it looks like that you just kind of woo through. And then the mini ones that you don't normally go through, but are more of like a landing spot, as you can see here. My initial thought behind the gameplay was, since I really wanted this part to be a wave similar to the corresponding segment at the beginning of the song, it was difficult to come up with a unique gameplay gimmick with the wave. But I did eventually end up having every block be landable, so making gameplay to that would be very weird, and I did end up deciding upon these flower structures, and it was a whole lot of fun to make gameplay with. And believe it or not, this definitely ended up being one of the harder parts, just due to how unconventional it is. As for how designing the gameplay went, I tried going for a make it look good and then figure out how to play it later, which was definitely largely inspired by how KrmaL kind of designs their levels, especially for something like XO, where a lot of the visuals are like, wow, that is a whole structure or mini art piece. How do you maneuver through that? And that's kind of like where the whole uniqueness of XO comes from. So I almost wanted to capture that vibe in a way, and I'd say I did. It turned out very cool. This is one of the most simple but also kind of dynamic parts in the level. The entire, like, I want to say 10-15 second segment revolves around these structures which constantly loop around. The trigger work for this took so much messing around with, especially the group work, which I probably don't even know how it's ordered at this point. Basically, the entire idea is that these use the same flower pillars as before, but now they're actual spikes, which grow out and rotate around, so it's almost like the pillars are now blooming. Another detail is the randomness within the part. It's a little hard to notice at first, but if you play this part a bunch, you will notice that how you go through the part is different each time, and that is because these pillars are offset on the X, a different value every time. It's not by a lot, it can either be offset by 20 or 40 blocks. But besides all of that, gameplay wise, there's not a lot to talk about here, but it probably is one of my favorites to play because it's just so fun. Now we reach the finale. The gameplay here, obviously pretty simple, is characterized by the bonking and the vertical pillars. Designing this part was actually kind of fun because every time you click, you're not going to get any vertical elevations, so I wanted to play around a bunch with the idea of kind of like floating around or like barely nudging yourself to areas that you normally wouldn't be able to reach if you just fell. But besides that, this UFO part is simple. For the visuals in this part, I decided to bring back the sort of ground spike pillar thingies that were present in the second half of the first drop, which you can sort of see mirrors how the wave immediately comes before the UFO part. So I kind of wanted to bring back that mirroring. This time to close in from behind you instead of front, which I felt was a pretty cool way to demonstrate that repetition. Then we have the sort of flower constellation of sorts, which is kind of what I had in mind for it. That pulses in and out throughout the part. Designing it was very confusing. In the end, it turns out I massively overcomplicated it, but I do think it turned out very nicely, and it's a fun little detail if you notice it. Then, of course, I wanted to bring back the petals from the previous part, so now it's like spring is in full time and the flowers are everywhere and we are enjoying the blooming season. Yeah. Then there's also the new sort of spike trails that flicker throughout the level. I kind of envisioned them to be snakes of sorts. The spikes were actually a sort of second thought addition because this part originally wasn't full enough to my liking. Actually, I don't know, I'm not too sure. This part as a whole, visual-wise, is not the greatest, but it does feel nice in terms of climax and adds an accumulation of everything that came before it. For the spider portion of this second half of the second drop, I wanted to stick with the vertical pillar designs, and obviously spider and vertical aren't the most hand-in-hand things. However, You may have noticed in other levels that it is possible to click on the edge of a block and still teleport up, and I wanted to take full advantage of that. Normally, landing on the edges of these blocks is very finicky and kind of weird. It wasn't the worst thing, but once I added like an additional inside box, it made this part a lot more consistent and a lot more enjoyable. Besides that though, this is just as simple as the UFO part. It was just a matter of connecting the dots and making it flow good. And now for the final part, which I largely wanted to mirror the beginning in its simple background and simple colors and simple details. So I decided that this time, the gameplay would be centered around this player-aimed saw that tries to follow your Y position, which I'm surprised isn't something that more levels do. I think it's a really fun way to make a level dynamic in its gameplay, and also each attempt different from the last, which also ties in with the randomization of whether these spike pillars come in from the top or bottom. You can still just like stay in the center for a second, which sucks, but I didn't want to mess with the part too much in order to make it where it's mandatory to go to the opposing side of the spike pillars. But besides that, the gameplay and visuals here are really simple, which does mark the end of the level. Yay. Something very silly about this ending is that the end menu pops up twice, and I believe this is because the end trigger is also the last object in the level, so it ends up kind of like replaying it twice, but that's just my guess. For the ending here, I obviously wanted to keep it very simple. A lot of levels nowadays typically go with like a full art made end screen and everything, but something that KrmaL does is that he just doesn't really have an end screen. Usually just like a simple message or something, and I wanted to sort of like follow in those footsteps. And I do think it does make for a super nice end screen in how you just look at the two little details and get to soak it all in. This sort of ring of cogs here is a reference to the ending of soundodger plus Bloom, where at the end of the level, the enemies shoot once and then go bye-bye forever. So this is supposed to be like a neat little reference to that. So you can see here it's full, but by the end, it's just a single one and then boom, they're all gone. Well, pretend it's gone. A super fun little detail I decided to add in this part were the little like flowers that bloom as you go across them. I was actually kind of surprised how long it took me to use the flower object located within the editor, but I think this is like the perfect use of them as like a small little detail that you see within the climax of the level. It's so cute and fun. One thing I do want to note is the little spiny thingies. Oh my god. These spiny thingies are basically like an almost reimagination of the ones located here, which are sort of like orbiters around the main cogs. But this time, they act as sort of like fairies as they just float around alongside you and just play around and prance in the fields. I thought it was a cute detail, and I had a lot of fun making it, especially figuring out how to use the keyframes, which I've used before, but this is making it pace right. It's definitely a lot of work. I do want to mention that I've seen a lot of comments kind of like refer to this part as being similar to the ship duels in Lotus Flower, and I just want to mention that this is not really inspired. I guess both parts kind of have like similar visions, but this is just on its own thing. I didn't really have Lotus Flower in the back of my head whenever I made this. My biggest reason for designing the gameplay like this, where each element is sort of like added on upon each segment, is that in the soundodger plus Bloom, the same segment in the level does the same sort of gimmick or concept where first it's just one element synced to the initial thing, and then once a new thing is added, another set of bullets or patterns is introduced. And then at the end, it all amounts to a whole big crazy section, which I guess also sort of inspired the duel, because this is a whole the learniest bit in the level, and so is the one in Soundodger Plus. Normally, you're supposed to go down to get this normal portal so that you can squeeze through these gaps pretty nicely, but obviously you have the entire free will to skip it and also get this silly little dialogue. That's kind of something I tried doing throughout this level, was to leave out little bits like this where the player can just decide, but what if I didn't do this? It's fun, and I think more levels should just do it. The little bit here was actually inspired by the ship parts in Rust, because I was a huge fan of the simplicity of the design, because in HVU could have easily had you go through chasms and gaps, but instead there's something really nice about the simplicity of just going up, going down, and barely squeezing by. So that's something I wanted to capture the vibe of here. And one of my other favorite details is this like ring of circles. Originally it looked kind of a bit like a trail, didn't really look nice or even, which would go against this whole part. But if I add like a ring of this, it just feels really satisfying to fall in, and then doom. I will mention working with these particles were a huge hassle because they're like barely functioning. Because originally whenever you started the level, it kind of ended up being like a slope of sorts of the particles, and that wasn't what I wanted to go for. I wanted to be like, kind of like you're swimming through a sea of evil abstract particles. But in order to have that happen, I originally was not familiar with how the particle trigger worked, but after a while I figured out Quick Start did exactly what I wanted by having all the particles immediately be kind of spread out. However, the game still isn't the most functional thing, and if you like start the level, you can see here at the beginning, it doesn't like immediately start like all established or anything. There's not much I could have done about that. I tried adjusting it, but nothing ever happened. Another detail you might notice whenever you start up the level is the LDM for more gambling, which if you turn on the LDM, it makes it randomize whether you start from the top or bottom, which doesn't actually change anything since they're exactly symmetrical. The process of making it was actually incredibly difficult. Not difficult, but very annoying, because I had to, there's invisible like pillars that prevent you from going where I don't want you to go, but for God knows what reason, the random trigger, it applies really weirdly whenever you put it at the very beginning of the level. And it was doing all sorts of strange things that I couldn't understand. So I had to do a whole bunch of weird shenanigans, which was really frustrating, but I decided to get it done anyways because I thought it'd be really funny. I hired gambling. I'm actually gonna bring this up because I had gotten a comment about it whenever I initially shared this level with some other people. I was told to maybe switch out the question mark for something else, but I decided not to because I felt like it gave a really nice vibe about how it leaves you curious, but it's also still mysterious, almost like an exasperation where it feels odd, but it connects you between like the abstractness of the level, but also the fact that like you're playing the level in Jump Dash. It's also something done in like a few KrmaL's levels, I believe, so I feel like it really accentuates that vibe. I don't know if I used that word right. If you look at the beginning of the level, you can actually see this toggle trigger for the thumbnail of my verification video. So if you go ahead and toggle on this trigger, you can actually see the thumbnail used for my verification video. So if you just enter the level normally, boom, it's right there for you to see. My idea behind this thumbnail was that if you look at KrmaL's channel, you can see that a lot of his verification thumbnails look like they could have been made in Geometry Dash if you tried hard enough. So I wanted to sort of run away with that idea. And I think the simplicity of the thumbnail just feels and looks really nice. I'm very proud of it. And there we have it. One of my best creations to this day. So much so that I still can't comprehend it even after 3 months since I beat it. Which reminds me, I've only told half the journey. July 21st was the day I officially finished Bloom. So the next step was to get it verified. This wasn't something I had thought about throughout the entire time I was making the level, since I knew quite a few people who were more than capable of beating a level of its difficulty. But then the thought had popped in my head. If Bloom is so inspired by KrmaL, why don't I go the full mile and verify it myself, since that's the standard for what KrmaL does? So then I started playing the level bit by bit for the following days, but I still didn't actually consider verifying it because there's no way I was going to beat a level that has gameplay with difficulty that's just outside my comfort zone for 4 minutes. Day by day I would get some runs, but nothing huge. But eventually I would end up finding the level addictive to play, and that was when I decided, let's do it. At first I was pretty confident because there was still a week and a half ahead of me and I was already getting some pretty decent progress in runs. But as the days slowly counted by, the crushing reality was starting to seep in that if I didn't beat it on time, all of my efforts for the previous 3 months would go to waste. I wasn't about to risk submitting the level unverified in the chances that it would disqualify the level, and even if I did want to risk it, I would have to upload the level early, which I didn't want to do since I wanted to upload the level with the same recording that I beat it. Which sounds stupid, but trust me, the satisfaction of getting to upload the level right after beating it was unlike anything else. With about 5 days until August 3rd, it felt as if I couldn't afford a single moment without making progress on the level, so I would start pouring almost every second of my free time with the level. It was a grueling period, but one I didn't mind since I found the level to be really fun. With 3 days left until August 3rd, my mind was beginning to spiral since the past week had been nothing but Bloom, and the stress from the thought that everything I had worked up for until this point would be for absolutely nothing. You would think this would heavily affect my performance negatively, but surprisingly it did the exact opposite. I think through pure, unfiltered will and determination, I was able to enter a completely empty mental state and focus on nothing but the level, which helped tremendously with nerves as my heart rate would remain relatively low throughout the whole level until the second to last part. As the final 3 days ticked, I would maintain a level of consistency that gave me just enough hope that maybe, just maybe, if I keep going at it, it will happen eventually. August 1st arrived and morale started to finally look positive. I had just gotten a 96% run and figured, yeah, I can do this in 2 days. But that very same day, I would make a drastic realization that the deadline was at the very start of the 3rd and not the midnight of the 3rd. Once I figured this out, my heart had dropped cold and all of my spirits were crushed. I was able to have faith in 2 days left, but to have less than 24 hours? It was not going to look very bright. Then it was August 2nd, which was the final day to verify. Every run that died past the middle swing would chip away at my hope just a little. With every second meaning so much to me, the time loss of a failed promising run would remind me that there's only so many promising runs I can have before it would be too late. And many promising runs did in fact fail. It was now midnight and the calendar read August 3rd, and I was just about ready to call it quits, submit the level and pray. But deep inside of me, there was a glimmer of chance. I knew it wasn't over until it was over. Despite how grim things looked, I continued onwards and gave it my all, because with enough faith and determination, you can do anything. Oh my god, no, this is not real, 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 this is not this is not real, this is not real, this is not real, this is not real. No, Sean, no. Is this real? Is this real? It's hard to believe this all happened. It all reads like a tale out of a book, and I have to say, there's nothing in the world I wouldn't trade to have another experience like it. Despite the amazing highs and unfathomable lows, I had an absolute blast with Bloom as a whole, from the making of it to the verification. And I give my many thanks to everyone who made this possible. In hindsight, it was definitely a strange move to make the level really pander to KrmaL. He mentions in his upload of Bloom that he had a hard time allowing himself to enjoy the level due to the targeting. But I guess in the end, it allowed me to do things I otherwise would have never tried, so thanks KrmaL. If there's any takeaway that you get from this video, let it be this. You don't have to be a mega art genius to make something great. Hell, the word great in of itself is subjective. What matters most when you make things is that you enjoy it. Never fear to try something new, unique or bold, crazy even, because what will come of it will be a learning experience, and what you learn can go towards something much greater. Go fulfill your passions, no matter how incapable you may feel, because if I can be a creative, you can be one too. 3. Yeah, that's how counting works, right? Anyway, With that being said, thanks for watching and let your flower bloom!